Hey, this is the second part of my monologues on Kabbalah. If you want to see the first one, click here. In the first part of the series, I point out that Kabbalah, especially as understood by Michael Lightman, is not falsifiable. And I still hold that view, because I haven't encountered anyone online who would just overtly state, now I am going to give you reasons why you should believe that Kabbalah is true. With that in mind, I decided to go out of my way and find some claims made by Kabbalists which could be tested and shown to be either true or false. And here they are. Let's take a look.
Falsifiable claim made by Kabbalists number 1. Creation of Adam.
As you will find, this is a slightly different story than your usual creationistic nonsense. It's worse. If Kabbalists have any favorite passage from the Hebrew Bible, it surely is this one. Listen.
So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Genesis 1:27.
Now, as you might have noticed, the first segment really says the same thing as the second one, doesn't it? The Kabbalists noticed this and came up with an explanation. They proposed that these really depict two different acts of creation. The creation of two aspects of the human, the female and the male. Interestingly, some Kabbalists think that the first man was really androgynous, a hermaphrodite. And we find this in the Zohar as well. Just to refresh your memory, the Zohar is one of the most important books of Kabbalah. It has been published in the 13th century by Moses de Leon, who claimed that he didn't write it, but he received it. It has been passed down to him from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who actually is one of the characters of the Zohar. Modern scholars actually think that Moses de Leon wrote the Zohar and that he was lying about its authorship and ancient origin. The Zohar is mainly a commentary on the Torah. Getting back to the issue of the creation of man, another explanation is that Adam and Eve were really Siamese twins. They were conjoined back to back with their heads facing the opposite directions. The Zohar refers to the first man as double-faced and really states that the passage from Genesis 2:27 of the woman being made of Adam's rib is really a further development in the story. The Zohar states, "The Holy One, blessed be He, sawed him through," meaning that he separated the female from the male. Now, as it happens, the Hebrew word rib can also be translated as side. So the Zohar states,
"And he took one of his sides and closed up the flesh in its place." Genesis 2:21. And he took one means precisely one. Adam had two ribs, and he took only one of them.
By the way, the other rib was not Adam's, it was Lilith. But let's focus on what's important for this video. All that, it's a cool story, right? But there's a problem. Unless you want to treat this whole passage as a metaphor, which I'm sure a lot of you Kabbalists do, then this is totally inconsistent with everything we know about biology. There was no first human, just as there wasn't a first tiger. Every individual animal belonged to the same species as its parents. But over millions of generations, the small changes, small differences, which gave the animal a better chance for survival, became more and more pronounced. Thus, through a process of continuous tinkering, the changes which might be imperceptible to us over a single lifetime led to an evolution from the simplest form of life to modern human beings and every other species. Of course, you can postulate that the male-female human has just been magicked into existence from nothing by a god. But please note that you do not have any reason to think that, and every piece of evidence that we have collected points to the fact that we have evolved from more primitive ancestors, just as much as spiders, elephants, oak trees, or kangaroos. The evidence comes from the fossil record, from DNA analysis, and from experimental trials. If you claim that humans or animals have been created as they are now by a deity, then please note that you have absolutely no reason to think that, and every reason to think that we have evolved through a process of natural selection and random mutation.
Falsifiable claim made by Kabbalists number 2. The Zohar talks about cholesterol hundreds of years before it was discovered.
The champion of this claim is a Kabbalist called Phillips. Here's what he has to say about this.
Dr. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai told us, and didn't get a Nobel Prize, and I'm quoting from the Zohar, from the liver emerges the gall, bad fats, and bile. By the way, bile is 80% cholesterol, which is the sword of the angel of death, from which comes bitter drops to kill human beings. The gall overcomes the arteries of the heart and all the arteries in the limbs of the body.
Artur spokojny quotes the same passage. This wouldn't be much of a deal. I mean, I've heard worse nonsense from Christians, but there's a problem. This claim is echoed by none other than Michio Kaku. Listen to this.
I think it's rather intriguing that the Zohar mentions cholesterol and mentions the liver and bile.
Here's my response in a compressed form. Yes, it would be intriguing if the Zohar mentioned cholesterol, but it doesn't. And I fail to understand why you find it intriguing that it mentions liver and bile. But let's take this step by step.
2,000 years ago, Dr. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai told us, in the body there are both good fats and impure bad fats. Clean blood without these bad fats, and blood contaminated with the impurities of the bad fats. This reads like a medical text. And if the liver, says the Zohar, wishes to offer bad fats to the heart, it only takes the good fats from the blood. This is also liver function. They only discovered liver function 150 years ago, but the Zohar is telling you the liver's function is to clean the blood.
Now, before I'll do the debunking, one thing needs to be noted here. If you have been an atheist for some time now, you will know exactly what happened here, because we get this crap all the time. For example, the Muslims say that the Quran contains information about embryology which could not possibly be obtained by anything short of a miracle. And the Christians say that there are Bible passages which clearly declare that the earth is a sphere, before any such thing was demonstrated by scientists. How's that possible? Well, here's an explanation. So you are religious, and you already think that your scripture is true, but you want to have something to present to the atheists because for some mysterious reason they keep insisting that you show them the evidence. So what do? You read your scripture, fishing for anything which seems to match our 21st century discoveries. And if the book that you are using is long enough, then you are almost guaranteed to find something which you can spin in such a manner as to make it seem to resemble modern science. Here's the Catholic Bible, and here's the Quran, and here is the Zohar. With a book of this length, I wouldn't even be surprised if they got something right. But if they got anything right, it is certainly not cholesterol. Let's take a look. All of these medical claims come from the Pinchas, one of the books of the Zohar. However, what I'm about to tell you happens throughout the book. Basically, throughout the Zohar, Rabbi Shimon and his sidekicks discuss various issues with reference to biblical characters, the Sephirot, the Jewish tradition, to Hebrew letters. They constantly mention those things. Evidently, they think that if you draw an analogy between, in this case, human organs and disease and biblical characters, then this will grant you some deeper insight into how disease and organs work. From what I've read, in the Zohar, everything significant ultimately comes down to the Hebrew Bible. And in the Pinchas, we have a prime example of how Moses de Leon tries to marry theological speculation with medical recommendations. I don't think I have to tell you what will be the result of this. So let's take a look at Billy's passage.
Here's Billy's version. From the liver emerges gall, bad fats and bile, which is the sword of the angel of death, from which come bitter drops to kill human beings. As you'll be interested to find, this is actually not what the Zohar says. And the original says, from the liver and the appendix, which are Samuel and Lilith, emerges the gall, which is the sword of the angel of death, from which come bitter drops to kill human beings.
As it is plain to see, Billy tinkered with this passage to make it look more impressive than it really is.
He removed the mention of the appendix and the reference to Samuel and Lilith, and he added, just inserted, what he would like the Zohar to say.
Now, the appendix in this context is not referring to what we today call the appendix. The original Hebrew word used here is yoteret, which refers to the big flap of fat surrounding the liver. So how does Rav Hamnuna actually know that the liver and the appendix correspond with Samuel and Lilith? No explanation is given. So basically he is pulling that information out of his butt. And what about the medical claim? Well, the gall does not come from the liver and the fat around it, because the fat does not secrete any gall. The liver does secrete gall or bile, yes. It comes from the gallbladder, and this is actually what the Zohar probably meant. But it is by no means the sword of the angel of death. The bile does not kill human beings. In fact, the production of bile is a proper function of the liver. And if the bile is not produced, then something is seriously wrong with your liver. At this point, it needs to be noted that Moses de Leon, the author of the Zohar, seems to subscribe to the humor theory of disease, at least to a significant degree. The humor theory of disease, or humorism, posits that the imbalance of four bodily fluids in a person's body is the cause of all disease. This theory of disease was dominant among doctors for around 2,000 years, and the author of the Zohar seems sympathetic with that view, although he had a slightly different set of humors. Let's take a look.
For Michael, Gabriel, Nuriel and Raphael, who are living creatures of the chariot, control man's four good elements, which are water, fire, wind and earth, which are the secret of Hesed and Gevurah, Tiferet and Malchut, each of them having four countenances: lion, ox, eagle, man. And inequity, destruction, anger and wrath come from the white gall, which is the lung in which they make an adhesion, the red gall that is in the liver that turns red with Mars, the green gall that is attached to the liver, which is the sword of the angel of death, about which it is said, her end is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword, and the black gall, which is Lilith, which is the planet Saturn, which is controlled by the spleen, which is melancholia, lower Sheol, poverty and darkness, weeping, mourning and starvation.
First of all, yes, I also think that this sounds like the ramblings of a fucking madman. Second of all, the humor theory of disease is nonsense. It has been totally discredited. It has no bearing on reality. So there's some Zohar knowledge for you. Also, as you might have noticed, the Zohar talks about two kinds of gall from the liver. The first one is red, and there's no such thing, unless you mean blood. The second type is green gall that is attached to the liver. And this actually might be referring to the gallbladder and its greenish bile. I agree, yes. But in contrast to Michio Kaku, I don't find this intriguing at all. All you need to do to figure out what's inside the liver is to kill a mammal and slice it open. And then you would know that it has a greenish bladder in it, and that's that. No need for modern medicine to discover this. And they sliced open animals on a regular basis. Interestingly, 2 sentences further from Billy's favorite quote, the Zohar states that all sickness and death is dependent on this green gall, which is absolute nonsense. And at this point I find no plausible connection to cholesterol whatsoever. Okay, let's take a look at the second passage that Billy provides.
So here's the second passage. Gall overcomes the arteries of the heart and all the arteries in the limbs of the body. And here's what the Zohar actually says. Since the lobes of the lung are unable to quiet the anger of the gall, which overcomes the arteries of the heart and all of the arteries in the limbs of the body, that breathe, which is the secret of Hasidim, that blows in them, rises in the trachea, which is a shofar, namely the next world.
I do not blame Moses de Leon for having absolutely no clue about medicine at all. But I do blame Michio Kaku for being so easily impressed with crankish claims. As we can see again, this passage contains magical references, obscure language, and no medical knowledge to speak of. The gall does not overcome the arteries of the heart. Period. Now for some more Zohar claims.
And if the liver wishes to offer bad fats to the heart, it takes only the good fats from the blood. And the original is, and if the liver, which is Samuel, wishes to offer fatty parts that are ritually impure to the heart, it receives only the fat of a ritually pure fatty part.
Now, the necessary information to even try to understand this is to realize that this is being spoken in the context of Jewish animal sacrifice. That's what the chapter is about. If you read Leviticus, you will constantly encounter rules on how to sacrifice animals to Yahweh to atone for your sins. The rabbis in the Zohar discuss this, and then apparently one of them comes up with the idea that this is somehow analogous to what happens in the human body. And so it says,
For just as in the body there are pure and impure fatty parts, clean blood without waste matter, and blood contaminated with waste matter, as the arteries of the blood in the heart, which is Malkut, and the holy hosts, while the arteries of the liver, which is Samuel, are the impure hosts.
This just might be the most obscure paragraph I have read in my entire life. And I have read Kant and Deepak Chopra. Not only is it very obscure, I don't really know what's the point of writing this down, because it doesn't convey any practical information at all, as far as I'm concerned. And additionally, I have found that this has at least 2 translations. I guess we would have to ask Daniel Matt what he thinks about this passage. But remember, what we are trying to do here is to find out if the Zohar talks about cholesterol. Please notice that Billy once again decided that this passage needs some editing. The original clearly speaks of ritually impure fats, and this is an analogy to animal sacrifice. What you need to know is that some fats in Judaism are considered impure. And I'm not talking about fats on a microscopic level like trans fats, saturated fats, or cholesterol. Ritually impure fats in Judaism refer to a specific part of an animal on a macroscopic scale. Otherwise, kosher butchers would have to work with microscopes. Some animals in Judaism are not kosher, so everything in them is not ritually pure. Other animals are kosher, but some parts of them are not, like some abdominal fats. This is called Hellev. So a sheep's meat is ritually pure, but its fat is not. Okay, so in early Judaism, let's say that a Jew caught a sheep, killed it, and ate all of the kosher parts. The ritually impure parts would then be burned as an animal sacrifice to God. So whether this passage talks about animal sacrifice or kosher and non-kosher food, I don't know. But I find no reason to think that this passage talks about cholesterol. So Billy and Michael Berg, you are making this up. In case this still wasn't enough for you to totally discredit the Zohar as a source of medical knowledge, then now I will cherry-pick the verses. Here are a few more nuggets of wisdom from the Zohar.
This passage has rather interesting things to say about the lungs and the interaction between the kidneys and the brain. This one basically says that sin is the cause of disease, that disease spreads from the liver, and that bloodletting is a good remedy for this.
Liver is death for adults. Spleen is death for children.
Here are instructions on where to sit when you visit a sick person.
Okay, enough of this nonsense.
Falsifiable claim made by Kabbalists number 3. Kabbalah predicts string theory.
This answer is going to be very short because 1, I have no idea about string theory, and 2, I have very little patience for numerology. Here's what the paper I have found has to say about this. According to string theory, all of reality exists in exactly 10 dimensions. In Kabbalah, we are taught that God emanated from his infinite light through which he created the universe. Each of these 10 powers can be understood to be 10 dimensions of reality. No, they cannot. Yes, sometimes when Kabbalists talk about the Sephirot, they use the word dimension, but it is never used in the sense in which it is used in physics, when up, down, left, right, and forwards, backwards comes in. All 10 dimensions are seen to be contained within the point string of the letter Yud, which equals 10. Letters in Hebrew have numerical value, so every letter at the same time is also a number. The letter Yud is the first letter of God's essential name, Havaya, whose full value equals 26, the sole other possible number of dimensions of the universe according to string theory. Shocking. A shocking discovery. Would you like me to list some other names of God in Judaism? The Yod, the Hey, the Vav, the Hey, Elohim, Adonai, Yahweh, Yah, En Sof, Shekinah, Adoshem, Baal. Seems like you had a lot of names to choose from, doesn't it? And who said that you can take the Yud and then search for any word which has it as the first letter? You did. Why didn't you search for a word which has it as the second letter, or eighth? Who is making these decisions? As with all numerology, this is nothing else than throwing crap on the wall and seeing what sticks. In reality, what's happening is that you are making it fit. If you search long enough and with enough arbitrary choices, then you are guaranteed to find some dependence or relationship where there in fact is none. I would bet my life that you don't calculate the value of offensive words or words which are to do with bodily secretions to find some relationships. You know why? Because you are motivated to search in those places in which you would like to find.
Falsifiable claim made by Kabbalists number 4. The Kabbalistic creation story predicts the Big Bang.
Usually when this claim is made, the Kabbalists are referring to the creation story that Isaac Luria has presented, and that he somehow got the idea of the Big Bang before everyone else. Maybe let's do it this way. I'll read the Lurianic story, and you'll be the judge of how similar it is to the Big Bang. Prior to the creation, there was only the infinite Ein Sof, filling all existence. When it arose in God's will to create worlds and emanate the emanated, he contracted. This is called Tzimtzum. He contracted himself in the point at the center, in the very center of his light. He restricted that light, distancing it to the sides surrounding the central point, so that there remained a void, a hollow empty space, away from the central point. After this Tzimtzum, he drew down from the Or Ein Sof a single straight line of light, from his light surrounding the void, from above to below, into the void, and it chained down, descending into the void. Basically what happened later, according to Luria, is that this ray of light brought into manifestation the first man, Adam Kadmon, which existed in the form of the 10 Sephirot. Each Sephirot was a vessel to which God's light was poured. These vessels turned out to not be strong enough to endure the power of the light which poured into them, and they shattered. And this is why we live in an imperfect world. Kabbalists which make claim number 5 say that the shattering of the vessels corresponds to the Big Bang. The first thing to say here is that you need to specify if this refers to the spiritual world or the physical world or both. If this is supposed to only refer to the spiritual realm, then I have no interest in considering this at all. This is worthless. I have no interest in considering it until such a time as you show me a method to verify if such a spiritual realm even exists. And if this is supposed to refer to the physical world, then the whole Lurianic creation story is of no help to us at all, because it puts the Big Bang as the last event in the story. So this part of the story goes straight to the trash can, if you are only interested in falsifiable claims, as I am. Because the Big Bang is as far back as we can go, according to current science. This is not to say that I proclaim that the Big Bang was the beginning of all existence. I don't know if it was or not. If someday it turns out that time didn't have a beginning at the point of the Big Bang, or it didn't have a beginning at any point at all, then I'm happy to accept that. But until that time, I'm sorry, I can only rely on the current state of the science and what physicists tell me. Okay, so according to Kabbalists, the Shevirat HaKelim, the shattering of the vessels, must be the Big Bang because it has the same dynamic and cataclysmic character. But I see this claim as contradictory with their own doctrine. First of all, according to Kabbalah.info, the vessel is the physical world, and in the Lurianic story, there is such a time where the vessels are unbroken and whole. So basically what you're saying is that there was such a time when the physical world began to exist and was perfect, and when the physical world began to exist and was imperfect. Which is a contradiction. Of course, you could say that the perfect physical world was the point of infinite density just before the expansion, and that the Big Bang itself was the shattering of the vessels, and this we call rationalizing and theological tap dancing. Also, if your idea of the Ein Sof is that it has infinite knowledge, power, and is infinitely loving, then please note that this is inconsistent with the idea of the shattering of the vessels. Please explain to me whose fault was it exactly that the vessels shattered? If God wanted them to contain that light, then why didn't he just make them better? After all that, a Kabbalist might pull out the minimalistic card and say, yes, but the Lurianic story does say that the universe had a beginning. Yes, it does. But please consider, if you will, the options that we have to choose from here. The universe can really be only finite or infinite, which is not finite. In fact, in Polish, there is no word infinite, there's just not finite. This is a direct logical negation, which means that there are no other options. So congratulations! You had a 50% chance of getting it right, you did, and now you boast about predicting modern science. It's gonna come out tails! By the way, I think that if someday science discovers that the universe is infinite, then Kabbalists will say that they knew it all along, because God was always there. In conclusion, no, I do not find the Lurianic creation story to be virtually identical to the theory of the Big Bang. I find no mention in the Kabbalistic story of everything expanding from a single point smaller than the head of a pin. I find no mention of space, time, and matter being created at that point. I find no mention of when that happened, or the increasing rate of expansion of the universe. In other words, I find nothing in there which could not have been written by a 16th century Jew. Kabbalah is still nonsense. My name is Luke Wybranczyk, and I dare doubt.